What's up, guys? This unbelievable, historic, horrific run continues. I can't believe this. This is, yeah, it's unbelievable. It just continues. This is the worst run that I've had ever. I don't think there's any doubt in that. Doing this for getting close to 2 decades now, I've never seen anything like this. I, it's like I don't even know what to do at this point. Do you stop doing what's worked for 2 decades when there doesn't seem to be any legitimate reason to really change what you're doing? I have no idea. I don't know what's going on here. Things need to change. I liked both spots last night a lot. Neither of them got there. I just don't even know. We got to continue on. I mean, you do hit bad runs like this, but this is worse than I've ever seen before. It's expected that you have down swings like this, but not a prolonged downswing that lasts 3 weeks where you can't even win a single day over a span of 3 entire weeks. It's just absolutely insane. And it's, even if I get back to what I was doing before, it's going to take so long to recoup everything. And it's looking like this year might actually wind up being a losing year, which is absolutely insane. Oh, yeah. And it just so happens that it's the first full year that I'm doing this show, and I haven't lost a year since 2015, so that's great. That's the only losing year after a really good 2014. I had 2022, I think, was the best year ever that I've had, and then 2023 was also very good. So this is just ridiculous. I don't know if it's just a regression from that or what it is, but I think I know what I'm doing. It's just I'm not picking the games that actually happen to get there. I'm not weighing the strength of the plays correctly. Maybe. I don't even want to think about it. Let's move to today. We'll talk about hockey first. I mean, there's a full hockey slate here pretty much. I'm going to be on 2 games, and one of them, it looks like the market, according to pregame, is actually against me, and I just don't even see how that would be the case. I'm going to go back to the well and jump on the Nashville Predators. I don't think that you can even get them at an underdog price now. You can get them at a slight minus 105 favorite. Now, that's technically still the underdog because if they're minus 105, that kind of means the other side's probably going to be laying minus 115 or something like that. So they're the underdog, I guess, if you want to call it that. Nashville minus 105. St. Louis, they're sitting at minus 106 favorite. It looks like consensus right now. They have 86% of the cash, but 55% of the tickets. Over on the other side on Nashville, like I said, I'm not sure if I buy that at all. I don't see why the huge cash discrepancy would be on St. Louis. I mean, unless there's something that I don't know, but this is a spot where St. Louis returned home from a 3-game road trip with only 1 day off. So you think they'd be not in the best spot in that spot there, but they faced Edmonton, who's one of the better teams in hockey, one of the hotter teams in hockey. So they showed up for that one, and boy, did they show up. They won 6-3, although I think it's a little bit of a misleading result there because Edmonton actually did outshoot them, although you might say, well, that was because Edmonton was losing for a lot of the game. That is true. But even so, Edmonton statistically kind of outplayed them a little. A lot of the loss hinged on penalties on the Edmonton side. They gave up 2 power play goals in the game, so the game maybe was not as much of a St. Louis blowout as it looks. But now St. Louis is coming off that game. Huge win. Looks like a blowout win. They just got to be feeling pretty high on themselves right now. And then they have a Nashville team that hasn't really been doing anything, much of anything right in the recent time span here. St. Louis has them coming off that huge win, and they've just been sitting around at home. They do have Toronto up next, so I don't know if that's going to be cause for a look ahead or anything like that, although I think Toronto, I mean, they're pretty good. They have a better record than Nashville, so maybe you could say that might turn this into a sandwich spot a little bit. They might overlook Nashville here with a couple of better teams surrounding this, and what makes that maybe a more of a potential look ahead than it would be otherwise is that St. Louis lost to Toronto to finish that road trip. That was their one loss they had on the road trip, and that was on the heels of a big 7-2 blowout win at Montreal. Though not impressive beating Montreal, but still, the last game St. Louis had a big blowout win like that. They did not do well in the next game against Toronto, so they're in another one of those spots where they're coming off a big win like that, but it was against a much better team this time. So they might be in another letdown spot here because they just lost to Toronto pretty badly. They might be looking ahead to that Toronto game just a little bit more than they would be otherwise. So I don't think it's a good spot for St. Louis. I think that if the return home distractions didn't really come into play in that first game in the return home because they had a big opponent there in Edmonton, they could kind of carry into this game here. So I don't think it's a very good spot for St. Louis, a spot where they would be completely focused or have reason to be completely focused here. Whereas Nashville, they're coming off an ugly loss, even though it was to a good Dallas team. They lost 9-2, dude. And that was the game I was on where I thought that it wasn't a good spot for Dallas there. Nashville has not played well since returning out of the All-Star break. They've only played 3 games. They've lost the last 2 of them by a combined score of 13-4, losing to New Jersey and Dallas at home. So things not going well for Nashville at all. They also only have 1 day off. But I think this is going to help them, man. When you give up 9 goals in a game like that, that's an embarrassing thing to happen to you. You're going to be focused after that. I think kind of regardless of who the opponent is that you're playing. I don't think Nashville can really afford to overlook many teams at this point either, even though they do have Vegas up next. I don't think they're going to overlook anybody coming off such an ugly loss, 9-2. And I think it's going to help the fact that they're going out on the road here now to start a long road trip. Things weren't working at home. Everything was bad at home. So you get to put that all aside, put those distractions aside. I think it helps break that like losing momentum if you're playing really poorly at home and then you get to go out on the road. You get to put all those things away and just focus on hockey. I think that's going to turn this into a more positive spot for Nashville. So that's play number 1, maybe the weakest play that I think I have here. Nashville Predators, but I do think the spot calls for it. I don't know what I'm seeing in the market here, what's going on with that, but Nashville Predators will be that play. The other play is going to be a play in probably the ugliest game on the board, the last game on the board in the NHL, Columbus at San Jose. I'm going to lay the price with Columbus at minus 134. And when would you ever want to lay a price like that on the road with the Columbus Blue Jackets? Well, it's when they're playing the San Jose Sharks, of course. I like the spot, even though I think maybe the line is factoring in the rest situation a little bit because it's so much better for Columbus, but the line appears to be still climbing on Columbus, and Columbus has 83% of the cash, but 59% of the tickets over on the other side in San Jose. So it does look like the market discrepancy and the line movement is in agreement with the Columbus side here. So market in agreement with my feelings on this one. And I think the situation does call for a play on Columbus here, because what are we looking at with San Jose here? They're coming off a big win for them, at least over the Calgary Flames. They were a big underdog in that game. Calgary was like above a minus 300 favorite in that game. They're actually coming off 2 big games in a row, really. They've only played 2 games since the All-Star break. So San Jose, so you might say, well, wait a minute, doesn't that mean they're the more rested team? I would say no, because they've just had a packed recent schedule. And now they're playing a 3rd game in 4 days, all in different cities. And they're returning home for the first time since the All-Star break. So they haven't been home since then. They went out on the road, even though short duration of a road trip, I guess. They lost by 1 at Winnipeg. So they played pretty well in both of these games because they were the more rested team at that point. But now I think that rest situation is going to start turning around a little bit because they've played these 2 games recently, and they played these 2 games in a span where Columbus hasn't played at all, I believe. Columbus, I don't think, has played since the 13th, whereas San Jose's played both of these games since then on the 14th and 15th. So San Jose, the much less rested team here. They played tough at Winnipeg, only losing 1-0, even though I think statistically they actually got dominated in that game, but the score was really close the whole time. Then they went into Calgary, coming off that game with no time off on a back-to-back, and they beat Calgary 6-3 as a huge underdog, which is just crazy. But it was a bad spot for Calgary. Calgary was returning home from a road trip, a long road trip, I believe. So that was not a good spot for Calgary. So that's one of the reasons why I think Calgary got caught a little bit there. The game was pretty close statistically. So statistically, it doesn't look like a 6-3 type of game, although it was close. So San Jose did probably deserve to get out of there with the win, but maybe not a win that looks as ridiculous as 6-3. I don't know if there was an empty netter at the end of that or what. I guess there wasn't. I guess they were winning 6-2, and then Calgary put in a garbage time goal at the end to actually even make it closer. But statistically, the game was closer than that final score looks. But that's still a big win for San Jose. Now they're the team returning home with only 1 day off. And in 2 days on Monday, they have to play the Vegas Knights, a much bigger team, a much more significant game there, even though it's like, well, San Jose, has one of the worst records in hockey. They can't afford to overlook anybody. Yeah, that's true, but Columbus, their record is also almost as bad. They can't afford to overlook anybody either. So I think that goes for both teams. San Jose is just in the worst spot here, man. They're coming back home off of that 2-game trip, even though it didn't really take them that far or last that long. Those are 2 big games to them, and now they're playing a 3rd game in 4 days. Like I said, all in different cities. That's not a good rest spot, whereas Columbus hasn't played since the 13th, so they've been off for that entire time, and they've only played 2 games since the All-Star break as well. They played on the 10th and lost to Tampa Bay at home, and then they went up to Ottawa and they lost 6-3. So they lost in really ugly fashion to not a very good team in Ottawa. So that's a pretty ugly loss for Columbus. I think they're in a bounce back spot here, and with extra time off, getting to just, I mean, they are traveling quite a bit, but extra time off, 3 days to do that, to get out to the Pacific Coast. I think it's almost going to have an effect like it's starting another like new road trip here because you have that much time off. I think it's going to break that losing momentum, help break that momentum a little bit. Columbus is a much more rested team here, and I think this sets up a nicer bounce back spot here because they're coming off the ugly loss there to not a very good team in Ottawa, and having the extra time off, I think is going to help break that negative energy, that negative momentum that they have, even though they have a bigger game against the Kings up next. That's also not for 3 days. But I think this is going to serve to just focus them on hockey just because they've had that extra time off. They're going to take that time to focus and try to do something here to break that negative streak that they're on here. So I like the spot a lot better for Columbus. It looks like the market agrees with me here. So those are the 2 hockey plays. So Columbus in that one, -134 or whatever, even though laying a price with a team as bad as Columbus on the road doesn't seem like a great idea. But when it's against the San Jose Sharks, that is just the situation that you get there, man. Going into college basketball, I guess I'll just comment on a couple other games real quick where I actually kind of lean to the Iowa State side, but the market is definitely against that, and I'm not going to be able to quite get there with the Iowa State side, although actually the market looks like it flipped on this one. So maybe should I jump in on this? The line's down from Iowa State 7 to 6.5, and I guess I'll just stay off of it. But Iowa State's down from 7 to 6.5, but it does look like they have 51% of the cash down. 57% of the tickets look like they flipped over to the other side on Texas Tech, with I think the general public, I think maybe thinking this might be a closer game maybe than what the line looks. I don't know, because Texas Tech has dropped out of the rankings, though, which is kind of crazy, despite the fact that they just beat Kansas. So that would be the main reason why I would want to lean against Texas Tech here, is they're coming off a blowout home win of Kansas where they won by 19 points. That was the game I was on because I thought it was a bad spot for Kansas going in there. I forget what the spot was exactly for Kansas, but I didn't like the spot at all. Kansas, yeah, they were coming off a win over Baylor. I thought it was just a bad spot, and the line looked really suspicious with Texas Tech being a favorite there. Texas Tech was in the rankings at that point, but big win for Texas Tech, even though I think Kansas is overrated, as I keep saying. When you beat a team that's ranked in the top 10 on your home floor and you stomp them by 19 points, I don't know if you're going to be in the best spot after that. And you have to go up to, Ames, Iowa, up there, Iowa State. Not the easiest place to play, really, either. Iowa State, a much better defensive team than Texas Tech is. Iowa State, one of the better defensive teams in the country, could throw them off a little bit, but Iowa State does have Houston up next. So that gives me a little bit of pause, and the fact that it's another ranked team in Iowa State. It's not like it's a team you're going to overlook. So if you play Iowa State here, it would be more that you're just expecting Texas Tech to run out of gas and not have that much left in the tank there. But Iowa State did also play a game that maybe was a little bit close for comfort at Cincinnati, even though I think Cincinnati was actually the favorite in that game. Iowa State did handle them for the most part and had a pretty big lead for the entire second half, but the game looks a little bit close for comfort there for Iowa State, winning by only 9, and it's against a Cincinnati team that's kind of near the bottom of the Big 12 and not really that good. It wasn't the best spot for Iowa State, so I thought Iowa State might get caught in that one, but they did still win, which kind of shows me something there. So maybe that game, I don't know if that game would serve to like refocus them a little bit there, but I think if you play Iowa State here, it's more that you're banking on them being just a really good home team, the better defensive team, even though they're laying a bunch of points, 6.5. And you're saying that you think that Texas Tech is in like the letdown spot there against coming off that big win over Kansas there. But Are they going to be in a letdown spot facing another top 10 team? Maybe they won't be. I mean, I don't see how you could be totally unfocused against a team like Iowa State there, but the market looks like it's shifting a little bit to be in agreement with the Iowa State side there. So that is the way that I lean in that one, but I don't think it's one that I'm going to be able to actually do. But I do kind of I do like that one to a decent extent. I would say I would lean against Little Rock just because they came off a big win over Morehead State. That's the best team in that conference, man, in the Ohio Valley. Is that where they are? I think it was against Morehead State. That's a big win, man. So Little Rock coming off that and playing one of the worst teams in the conference now in Southern Indiana. Probably not the best spot for Arkansas. Little Rock there, down from 10.5 to 10 there. So I don't like Little Rock in that one, really. I think they're in the letdown spot. What else we got? I think USC Upstate is also probably in a letdown spot. Gardner Webb laying 2.5, still sitting at 2.5 on the road against them. USC Upstate just beat High Point, who are atop the Big South Conference there. So that's a big win for USC Upstate. So they could be kind of in a letdown spot there. Although I haven't looked at like whether or not, I think this is like a second meeting in some of these cases. And I looked, but I kind of forget what the result of like the first meetings are. But I could just say in general that I would not want to be on Little Rock or USC Upstate. So if that information keeps you off of those, maybe that's helpful. I don't know, because I don't like either of those sides there. I don't like the Santa Clara side either, or excuse me, not Santa Clara, San Francisco. Well, maybe I don't like either of them really that much, but San Francisco I really don't like. They're up from 7.5 to 8.5 though at Loyola Marymount, and San Francisco, they're coming off a battle against Santa Clara, man. That's like a pretty intense rivalry there, really. And that game had a bunch of like ejections in the game. Both teams like really it got a little dicey in that game. One of the teams won by one, and I forget which team even won by one. I don't think it even matters because that was like a big like emotional type of game there. Now San Francisco has to go to Loyola Marymount, who I think they already beat at home this year, and they have St. Mary's up next, who's one of the top two teams in that conference. I think it's still St. Mary's and Gonzaga atop the WCC there. So I think San Francisco's in a sandwich spot coming off that game with a bunch of ejections. It was a big emotional game against Santa Clara, who's usually one of the top 4 or 5 teams in that conference, and I would say they probably are again. And then with a big game against St. Mary's up on deck, I think they could get caught and overlook Loyola Marymount, although I'm not on that game, but that's the way that I look in that one. Only to the Loyola Marymount side there. And then I'll comment because it's a big game, UConn Marquette. Big game there between the number 4 ranked team and the number 1 ranked team. UConn's down from an 8-point favorite to a 6.5-point favorite with 68% of the tickets and only 64% of the cash. So the market read is indicating Marquette, with the line dropping on UConn and the cash discrepancy also going against Connecticut there. But I tend to think this is kind of one of those games where you would kind of think, even though the market isn't showing it right now, I kind of thought the public would maybe come in on Marquette a little bit here, just thinking that it's the number 1 team versus the number 4 team. The line looks a little big. Like you think that it might be a more competitive game than that. So there might be value in taking the points there. I thought that might kind of be the public sentiment there. So I don't know, because Marquette, I think, is a little bit overrated still. Ken Pom has them ranked 11th in the country right now. UConn, just the better overall team, I would say, especially offensively. Although Marquette actually a slightly better defensive team, according to Ken Pom, but that's it's close between those two teams defensively. UConn with one of the top offenses in the country, though. So my lean in that one would kind of be to the UConn side. Just UConn's coming off a real easy win over DePaul, too, whereas Marquette, I think, is coming off a tougher game. But both of these teams are going to show up in this one. This is like the highlight game of the day, basically. So we'll see what happens in this one. But in a game like this, I kind of lean to the team that I think is the better team to just kind of win out, and that is UConn. Because I think Marquette's just more overrated than UConn is. Ken Pom has UConn as the 3rd ranked team right now, but pretty close between Houston, Purdue, and UConn as the top 3 teams there. So Marquette being the team that's a little bit more overrated and continues to be a little bit more overrated as they're not in Ken Pom's top 10. So that's the way I look at that one. Is that all the games I wanted to kind of comment on, like other feelings in college basketball here? There might be a couple others that I'm just forgetting. I apologize if so, but those are kind of the ones that stuck out the most to me, I suppose, except for the games that I'm actually on. So I guess we'll get to those here now. Game number one, I forget what I'm even on. Georgia Tech plus 1.5. I mean, this is kind of a classic spot for me, although these haven't been working out well. And the market looks like it's against me on this one, and I don't know why. This is a classic letdown spot. I mean, Syracuse is up from a pick'em to a 1-point favorite going through the number of one. I think you can get Georgia Tech at 1.5 right now. I don't know if it's going to go up a little bit further because this game's not until 5:30 Eastern time. So you might even be able to get a little bit of a better number on this than the 1.5. I think KenPom has this game being a 1-point game one way or the other. I forget which way, but Syracuse, according to the market here on pregame, 55% of the cash, but 83% of tickets over on the other side on Georgia Tech. I don't see how that could be the case at all, really. I think the spot sets up nicely for a play against Syracuse here. I mean, this is a classic letdown spot in my book here. And looking at like the team's records and stuff, I don't see how the public would be on Georgia Tech here at all. Like Syracuse has a decent looking record. They're the team that has more name recognition. They're the much better team in the ACC standings as well. Georgia Tech second from the bottom, only ahead of Louisville, which is just awful. Georgia Tech, Louisville, Notre Dame, definitely the three worst teams in the conference. But even so, yeah, I just don't see, based on all that and their Georgia Tech's record looking really, really horrendous and the recent play, I don't see how Georgia Tech could be getting that heavy the public amount of tickets here. Look at what Syracuse is coming off of, man. After they had a scare against Louisville, which isn't great because Louisville sucks. They only got out of there with a 2-point win, but they might have been looking ahead a little bit. After that, they played two pretty decent games, man. They played well against Clemson, even though that was a game where I was on Syracuse. Syracuse hung in there and had chances to win the game there, really. I got close near the end there. They got to a tied game with a few minutes left. They just got outshot ridiculously. Clemson, that was the game where I was on Syracuse because Clemson, I think, was in the letdown spot after beating North Carolina. Foreshadowing here a little bit what I'm about to say here, but Clemson shot 61% from the field in that game and 43% from three, somehow overcoming 21 turnovers in that game to still win that game. I don't know how that could be the case. I don't know how you had such an outlier of a shooting percentage for Clemson in that game. So that it's one of those, it's just the run that I'm on, man. That was one of the plays that I lost on Syracuse there. And it's just the shooting discrepancy on the game is just so ridiculous. It's just how could this continue to be happening, man? Just these ridiculous, like, fluke things that are happening to me here in a lot of these games. So that's what happened in that game. But Syracuse played pretty well in that game against Clemson. Didn't quite get there. And then they turned around, another home game after that, and they beat North Carolina on their own floor. I think that was a court storming. You beat a top 10 ranked team in the country, man. I mean, your crowd's going to go all out. And that was revenge for a really ugly 36-point loss or something at North Carolina earlier in the season. North Carolina probably was not totally focused in that game. So that, I think, lended itself to it being a good spot for Syracuse there. Now Syracuse is coming off of that huge game. Now they go on the road to face one of the worst teams in the ACC, Georgia Tech, and they have NC State up next to is a bit under the radar just because they're not in the tournament bubble or anything, but they have a better record than Syracuse does. They're ahead of them in the ACC, so that's a bigger game than this one is. Going to Georgia Tech, man, are they really going to be totally focused on Georgia Tech here, coming off beating North Carolina? I'm not so sure about that. I don't really think so. I think this is a classic letdown type of spot here, and I don't think the number is way off from like where the power ratings are or anything like that. I think, like I said, I think KenPom has Syracuse winning this game by 1 or something like that. You can get 1.5 right now with Georgia Tech, and it might still go up. Georgia Tech, on the other hand, I think they're going to be focused with a big name team like Syracuse coming into their house, and they've lost 4 games in a row, 3 of them on the road, though. They didn't lose those games by that much, but the last 2 games they lost to the other 2 worst teams in the conference that I just mentioned, in Louisville and then losing to Notre Dame. That is ugly, man. So I think Georgia Tech's going to be in a spot where they're back home. They have a pretty decent team, a team that carries a lot of name recognition in Syracuse coming into their house. I think they're going to be focused on this game. They're going to want to play well against a name team like Syracuse here, coming off ugly losses to the bottom 2 teams in the conference, both on the road, though. So I think Georgia Tech's in a better spot where they're going to be in kind of a more embarrassed mode, in a spot that lends itself to having more focus than the spot for Syracuse coming off just the win of the season, basically, over North Carolina there. So much, much better spot for Georgia Tech. Horrible spot for Syracuse. I know I keep saying these things, and these things don't come to fruition, and I don't like what I'm seeing in the market here, but this spot, like, I just don't see how the market could look like this. With the spot and with these teams' records the way that they are, I don't buy it. I like Georgia Tech here, so that's play number one. Play number two is going to be this feels like an ugly one. It feels tough to do, man. Taking West Virginia plus 7.5 against Baylor. Baylor, of course, definitely the better team here. And KenPom actually has Baylor winning this game by 10, so we're going against the power ratings a little bit here, so I don't love that, but I don't like the spot for Baylor here. Baylor's up from 7 through the 7, 7 with juice. Could be closer to 7.5. Like I said, it's 7.5 right now. I don't know if it might even go up a little bit higher than that, but 7 kind of the key number in basketball, really, if there is one in that range, because that's where teams stop intentionally fouling when it's a 3-score game there. Market looks like it's indicating against Baylor. Baylor, of course, going to be the public team here, the ranked team with a much better record. West Virginia just is one of the worst teams in the Big 12 this year. Has been really kind of a mess with not much consistency, and they really had a lot of turnover, a lot of new faces, a lot of players that have been out for West Virginia. So not a good situation for Virginia for most of the season, really, just in general, which is been kind of why the record has been so bad. But Baylor with 63% of the tickets and only 60% of the cash. So they're the public team, public road favorite there. And it looks like they're, the cash discrepancy is against them a little bit. So those market indicators tend to indicate that you want to go against a team like that. That's a road favorite, laying points like that and having the public action on them with less of the cash and the tickets. If you look at the schedule here, this is kind of the down spot in Baylor's schedule here, man. They've played 4 big games in a row where they beat Iowa State at home, big win there against a tough defensive team, beat Texas Tech at home, who was ranked at the time as well, went out on the road to Kansas and played really tough, and they had chances to win that game against Kansas, only losing by 3, and I think they missed some shots at the end of that game where they could have potentially tied the game at the end there, losing tough game at Kansas there. Allen Fieldhouse, obviously a tough place to play. Big game against Kansas whenever you play Kansas. Baylor versus Kansas, kind of a big matchup always in the Big 12. And then coming off that, they didn't suffer a hangover, a letdown, or anything like that, although I went against them and I thought they might against an Oklahoma team, and I think it's just not really that good. And they're probably a little bit overrated, even though KenPom has had Oklahoma kind of somewhere like in like the top 20 or so for pretty much the whole year. So they haven't been overrated by that much. He actually has them outside of the top 30 now, but he said them like somewhere in like the between 20 and 30 for most of the year there. So not really overrated by that much, but Oklahoma maybe a little bit overrated, but still ranked team, and Baylor took care of them too. And now Baylor has to go out on the road. Baylor, this is only going to be their 3rd road game, going back all the way to when they played Texas was their last road game before those previous 2, which was back on January 20th. So they haven't played too many road games. Since January 20th, they've only played 2 road games, winning by 8 at UCF and then losing at Kansas. So you can't blame them for losing at Kansas, but winning at UCF, not very impressive. Now they have to go to West Virginia, and then after this, in 3 days, they have ranked BYU on the road. They're going to have to go out to Utah. Then they're going to have to come back home and face Houston. Then they're going to have to face TCU 2 days after that. TCU not ranked right now, but in the top half of the Big 12, another team that carries a lot of weight and a team that beat Baylor earlier this year. And they're going to have Kansas up again after that, and then Texas, and then Texas Tech. So this is the weakest opponent they have left. This is the game where they might have the least focus left in the schedule here, because all the rest of the teams they play and the prior 4 teams that they played were all teams that would cause them to focus more than this West Virginia game. This is like the down spot, like I said, remaining on their schedule with all bigger teams left in 4 straight bigger games that they played before this, and going to West Virginia, always not, I mean, it's never really the best spot for these Big 12 teams since West Virginia's moved to the Big 12. And of course, they've been there for a while now, so teams are more used to having to go out there, but it's still kind of a weird spot geographically for these Big 12 teams that are more like kind of southern teams there, having to go up into like central Appalachia basically to face West Virginia. not really the best spot there. It's a tough place to play in West Virginia. West Virginia, they've been playing pretty ugly, and they're coming off some real ugly performances, losing at home to BYU by 13, and then they went out on the road for the last 2 games, and they lost by 36 at Texas, and then they lost by 16 at TCU. Those are just ugly, ugly losses, man. A couple of blowout losses. Now you get to come back home and you get a ranked team coming into your house. I think they're going to be focused, man. They've lost 3 games in a row, losing all these games really ugly. They've lost 5 of their last 6 games, been playing real, real ugly basketball. But remember, they've won 2 of their last 3 home games, beating Kansas in one of them, and then the other one beating Cincinnati. Not as impressive, but they've won 2 of the last 3 home games. They've been a bit better at home than on the road, at least, so that's to be expected for the most part. They've played a bit better at home. They only have 3 wins in the conference this season, and all of them have come at home. So they've definitely been a better home team than road team. But like I said, that's kind of expected. Home advantage is pretty strong in general in college basketball, more so than other sports. So college basketball and college football, I suppose, carry the most home court advantage. So I think geographically it's an advantage, and it's just not a good scheduling spot for Baylor. And with West Virginia, they don't have too many games left that are like step-up games like this at home. This is the one game left that they have at home against a ranked team right now. The other ranked team they face is going to be Iowa State on the road. So this is it's one of their biggest games left. I think they're going to be focused. They have a big Baylor team coming into their house. I like the spot a lot better for West Virginia to be the more focused team here. So I'm on West Virginia. We can mark it at 7.5 right now. I don't know if the line's going to go up further than that, but we'll see. Next play is kind of right after that on the board in the same time slot. This feels like really dangerous to play this, but I kind of like the spot here for Kentucky at Auburn, even though I think Auburn is the significantly better team. I think Kentucky's an overrated team, and I think Auburn's just still underrated. But this is a spot where I think it's better to jump on the side of Kentucky here, even though KenPom has this at 10 as well. So we're losing some points of value there on the power ratings there, but I like the spot. Auburn's gone up from 7 through the 8, through 8 to 8.5 at this point, really. So you can get Kentucky 8.5 right now. Looks like some spots offering it at reduced juice as well. So not a bad deal there, I would say, on a Kentucky. I don't like the spot for Auburn at all, though. Like, people are finally recognizing Auburn for how good they are because of what they did in their prior game. Their prior 2 big games, even though they did lose to Florida in between the 2. And I was on Florida last Saturday, I believe is when that was. That was a pretty major sandwich spot for Auburn between crushing Alabama at home and then not only crushing, but just woodshedding South Carolina in their prior game. And I said, man, that South Carolina is way overrated. South Carolina was ranked higher than Auburn coming into that game, ranked 11th in the country, or Auburn was, I think, 13th. I said, man, Auburn's the much better team. They were an 11-point favorite or so in that game. Auburn, KenPom has had them ranked in like the top 10 for like the whole year, pretty much in the top 5 recently. He has them ranked 4th right now. South Carolina has down somewhere in the 50 range. So I was like, yeah, this is a game where the line just looks suspiciously big, and the odds makers are just telling you Auburn is a significantly better team here. And Auburn just absolutely wrecked South Carolina. And Auburn has been so good at home, and I'm bucking them at home here too, which is a really difficult thing to do. Auburn at home, they've won every single game at home this year by double digits, I believe. Every single one, not even just in the conference, but even in the out-of-conference slate, which those were against teams that were better. Although, actually, I guess they lost to Baylor at home in the first game of the season. Was that actually at home? No, it was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Never mind. So that was not an actual home game for them. So, yeah, every home game they've had this year, including the out-of-conference schedule, which most of those teams were not as good as these SEC teams are beating, but they've won by double digits in every single one of those. So I think something's got to give, man. Auburn, I think, looks too good at this point. That was a huge statement win over South Carolina. And the last time they had a statement win was the one prior to that against Alabama, where they crushed them at home. And they went out on the road, though, of course, and played pretty poorly against Florida and got pretty much destroyed by Florida. So coming off that game, they didn't do well. And off of their other statement game against Ole Miss, which was another game where they were facing an overrated team when Ole Miss was in the rankings back then. Ole Miss only had like 1 loss on the season, or maybe they didn't even have any losses at that point in the season. And Auburn put them in their place which I think Ole Miss got put in their place by Tennessee and Auburn. I forget which one of those games was first. The Tennessee one might have been, but still. That was a statement game for Auburn, and then they went on the road and they lost to Alabama. They actually lost 2 straight games on the road after that. So their track record after these big games against ranked teams, not good this year. So off of those, really, they've had those 2 other big statement wins at home this year, and they lost the ensuing game after both of those games. After beating Ole Miss, they lost to Alabama, but it was on the road, yes, at Alabama. And Alabama, much better team than what they were ranked at the time. Still an underrated team in Alabama there. So no shame in that loss. And then off of getting revenge over Alabama, their other big statement game at home, they lost on the road to Florida. So yes, 2 of those games were on the road. That is true. But they're in another one of the spots, man, where you got to be feeling like really, really high. Like South Carolina had become kind of like the talk of the town. They were atop the SEC, and Auburn said, yeah, hold on a minute, and just absolutely annihilated them by 40 points. How could you not be feeling a bit like inflated on yourselves there, high on yourselves there, even though it is Kentucky, a name team coming into your house? Are you really going to be totally focused on them coming off a statement win like that? I'm not so sure. I think Kentucky's going to have a little bit something to say about that. Kentucky coming off a few games that are not really that impressive, winning at Vandy. Then they lost to Gonzaga in that weird out-of-conference game there. Gonzaga, a much better team than what people think they are. Still, KenPom, I think, has them ranked like 19th in the country right now. Gonzaga should make the tournament this year, man. I think they're the best team in the WCC, too. So I think they still have the best shot at winning the WCC tournament again, but we'll see about that. But I do think Gonzaga's quite a good team, better than Kentucky, actually. And Gonzaga beat them. And then off of that loss for Kentucky, they turned it around and beat Ole Miss, although not that impressively, beating them by double digits. Ole Miss, not very good, really, but Kentucky handled them at home. That's good. And now they get to carry that newfound momentum off of beating Ole Miss out on the road. This is like one of their biggest games remaining here, going to face an Auburn team that is looking really good right now. And the other thing about Auburn is that Auburn is a fast-paced team, and so is Kentucky. So I think that's going to bode well for Kentucky here. Kentucky actually plays a faster pace than even Auburn does, so both of these teams like to speed the game up. So I don't think it's not going to be one of these like pacing collisions where Auburn likes to play a pace that's going to really throw Kentucky off their game. No, I think their pace actually plays into Kentucky's style. So I actually like that aspect of it better. So for Kentucky, I think Kentucky's going to be focused here, man. People are not going to want Kentucky after they haven't looked very good in the last few games, and Auburn just look like world beaters right now after what they did to South Carolina. Although, again, keeping in mind, South Carolina was way overrated coming into that game. That looks like a monster win for Auburn there over a ranked team like that, but the win's not quite as impressive as people may think, just because South Carolina is a lot worse than people think. Although Auburn is definitely still an impressive team, a very good team. The spot, I just don't think is the best for them. Auburn, much better defensive team, that is for sure, than Kentucky. But when you're going to probably have a style game like this where it's going to be like a fast-paced game like this, I think that's going to help Kentucky more, and it's going to help their offense more. Kentucky is the better offensive team, although it's very slight. They're the better offensive team. Their defense is really bad, though. So I tend to not like playing against the better defensive team, which is Auburn here. But Auburn's laying points here. So when it's a team that has the better defense, it tends to be a better play when you get the team with the better defense getting points. But that's not what we're getting here with Auburn being the better defense laying points. So we're bucking the trend as far as Auburn not losing any game or not failing to win any game by fewer than 11 at home all year. So we are bucking that trend here a bit, but they're also coming off a 40-point win, man, which is an outlier of a win too. So strange things happen here. I like Kentucky to bring focus into this game, and Auburn maybe not be totally focused and be maybe a little bit overvalued here, even though the power ratings still kind of indicate that they're actually still a little bit undervalued. I think the spot just isn't that good for them. So I like Kentucky here. And Auburn, I don't know. If you look at, I guess, the other game they played, the closest game that they did play at home all year was the game against Texas A&M, which is a slow tempo team. So that doesn't look great for the fact that this is going to be a fast tempo game. But even so, Texas A&M, they're a pretty bad defensive team, though, so I don't know. So we'll see. But I do think that the pacing of the game is going to help Kentucky play a game that is to their liking. So I think this might wind up being a closer game than people think. So I'm on Kentucky in that one. It's a really tough thing to do with how well Auburn has been playing on the road. Auburn just looks too good at this point. So I'm doing that. And then what's the final game I have here? I have one more game I'm going to talk about here. Running out of time here. Oh, shit, I got to do this quickly. Last game is going to be on. Good thing I did hockey first. UNLV in the late spot here, -1.5. It looks like they're actually up to 2 now. They get 86% of the cash and only 80% of the tickets. So it looks like the cash discrepancy is on them. I think Ken Baum has this as a 1-point game one way or the other. I think maybe he has Nevada winning by 1, but he only has Nevada ranked 45th. So he doesn't have them ranked as good as their record might actually look as good as the record might actually indicate, although he has UNLV probably way down in the 90s, 95. But this is going to be a big game for UNLV, man, and it's a tough spot for Nevada. I mean, Nevada's coming off 3 straight big games where they went on the road, beat Utah State, who's a good team in the Mountain West, still atop the Mountain West ranking-wise, and we're in the top 25 at that point. They beat them. They beat another top 25 team right off of that game, coming back home. A game that I think I might have been on, I forget, but they beat San Diego State at home. These Mountain West teams tend to have a good home court advantage, man. You tend to want to be on the home teams in the Mountain West, which is what we're doing here again. So Nevada beat them. Then they had another home game the other night, and it was a close battle against New Mexico, who is also one of the better teams in the conference. Probably actually one of the top 2 teams in the conference power ratings-wise, along with San Diego State. So that was another tough game. And Nevada wound up coming out of that with a 1-point loss. And now, off of that stretch of 3 really big games, now they have to go to UNLV, facing them for the first time this year, and UNLV is going to be gunning for them, man, because UNLV is the little brother in this rivalry, the Nevada rivalry. I think it's going to be a tough spot for Nevada having to go into this game. UNLV tends to put up a battle against them. It's a big game for UNLV whenever Nevada comes into their house, man. The Nevada's their bigger brother in the state of Nevada. UNLV playing second fiddle to them, and UNLV, they did just beat New Mexico 2 games ago, which is a pretty big win. But then coming off that, I thought they were in a bad spot, and they were, and they played poorly at Fresno State and got out of there with a win, but it was close, man. They barely escaped at Fresno, who's one of the bottom teams in the conference. So I think that was a bad spot for them. It makes UNLV look a little bit worse than they actually are. And I think they might have been looking ahead to this game a bit, which is why I was on Fresno in that one. I thought it was a sandwich spot between a big win over New Mexico and then having this game up next. I think UNLV was looking ahead to this game. They barely escaped against Fresno, which I think is going to give us a little bit of value on UNLV. And it's going to serve to help focus UNLV, as if they need anything to help focus them with Nevada's coming into their house. That alone is going to have them focus in this game. But because they almost lost to a bad Fresno State team, I think that's going to just serve to focus them even a little bit more. So that's going to do it for me, man. I like all of these. In hockey, one more time, Nashville Predators -105, Columbus Blue Jackets -134, laying prices on the road with 2 hockey teams. I hate it. Oh, God. And then in basketball, Georgia Tech +1.5, West Virginia +7.5, Kentucky +8.5, and UNLV -1.5. That's going to do it for me, man. I keep saying it, but this has to start turning around. And this is becoming beyond the point of absurd. It's so far beyond the point of absurdity that I want to just die at this point. There you go. Better off dead. I would be better off dead at this point. Can we just please have something? I can't take this anymore. I really cannot. Whatever. Peace.